Get out! Now! The words cracked through the narrow hallway like a rifle shot. The door was open, the light behind him golden and warm, but Victor Merritt stood in its shadow, 84 years old, bones wrapped in skin like brittle parchment, holding a folded lease in one hand and the strap of a duffel bag in the other. A single canvas bag, one he'd carried through the Korean snow. His landlord's face was red, mouth sharp with anger. I said, "Now. I don't care how many wars you fought. You're behind. This is my property." Her hand shot out, flinging a black trash bag toward his boots. It burst slightly as it landed, spilling out socks he'd folded that morning and the corner of a photo frame. Victor didn't flinch, but his eyes did drift, downward, to the photo now peeking from torn plastic. 3 young men in uniform, one circled in ink. Tommy, always forward. His fingers twitched at his side. A murmur ran down the corridor. Someone upstairs stepped out, leaning slightly over the rail. Another neighbor stood still behind a cracked door, barely visible, a child clutching her leg. Across the street, a curtain shifted and shut. Victor took a breath. It rattled through his chest like loose gravel. The wind stirred a torn Veterans of Foreign Wars cap on the ground. He had dropped it bending over too quickly. His shoe was untied. "I'm not refusing to pay," he said, voice low, gravel-pitched. "The check is late. I chose my medication. Just needed another week." The landlord scoffed, turning halfway toward the stairs. "That's not my problem. Choices have consequences." Behind her, unnoticed, a hand held up a phone. No words, just a recording, red circle blinking. And a few steps beyond the hallway, unseen behind the screen door, a figure turned and walked back toward their apartment. Quiet, steady, with purpose. The key still dangled from the lock. Victor hadn't removed it. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. Earlier that morning, Victor Merritt rose before the sun. Not because he had to. Not anymore. There were no Reveille calls in the quiet second-floor apartment where he had lived for 27 years. No drill instructors, no tents to break down, no boots to shine for inspection. But still, at 4:50 a.m., in his hand moved instinctively toward the small analog clock on the windowsill and silenced the gentle beep before it could ring a second time. He moved slowly, not out of laziness, but because of the quiet calculus of age. His bones spoke before his words did. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and sat for a long moment, letting the silence greet him. The room smelled faintly of cedar from the old wardrobe he had refinished himself years ago. His boots, polished and placed carefully at the foot of the bed, caught the first sliver of morning light. He reached down and picked up the framed photo from the floor where it had rested all night, tucked beside his cot. 3 young men stared back, all uniforms, all smiles. The one on the right had a circle drawn around his face in blue ink. Tommy, always forward. The glass was cracked, but he never fixed it. In the kitchen, he boiled water for weak tea, not out of preference, but economy. The last proper box of English breakfast sat half empty in the cupboard, reserved for visitors. He never had any. He folded his blanket military tight, pinching corners into perfect triangles. A habit, a ritual, a kind of remembrance. As he walked to the window, cane tapping lightly over the worn linoleum, he paused at the flagpole across the street. Just a simple white rope and a slightly faded banner, but every morning someone raised it. And every morning, Victor stood with his back straight and saluted. He whispered the same words he had since 1953, "For Tommy, for what you covered me from." Victor's morning continued with the same deliberate rhythm. He gathered the last 3 envelopes he needed to mail, hand-addressed letters, not for bills or subscriptions. Just short notes he wrote once a month to the families of men he once served beside. Only 2 were still alive. The others were to their children, or grandchildren, or no one at all. A ritual. He placed them in a thin plastic folder, tucked them beneath his jacket, and made his way to the post office. It was a short walk. He liked the feel of pavement beneath his shoes. A man with a destination, even if the world had long since stopped noticing. Inside the small-town post office, the air was cool, the light fluorescent. A young clerk, maybe 22 at most, barely looked up when Victor approached the counter. He reached into his pocket, withdrew a few folded bills, and said softly, "Just a roll of stamps. Forever, please." The clerk didn't glance up. He pointed toward the machine beside the door. "Sir, if you're just buying stamps, use the kiosk like everyone else." Victor hesitated. He preferred the human exchange. He always had. It wasn't about the stamps. He nodded once. Quiet. Turned toward the machine. Behind him, someone muttered, "Come on already." No one looked him in the eye. At the laundromat, Victor took his time. He folded his clothes at the large metal table near the corner, as he always had. T-shirts rolled tightly, socks pressed corner to corner, even underwear squared and stacked. An old woman in the corner smiled. She knew him by sight, had for years. But then, a teenager brushed by too quickly, headphones blaring some heavy beat. He knocked Victor's stack off the table with the edge of his hoodie. "Oops," the boy said, chuckling. Didn't think anyone still did hospital corners on socks. He didn't stop. Victor knelt slowly, picked up each item with shaking hands, refolded it all in silence. When he returned home, the sun had begun to set. He sat in his chair by the window and opened the letter from the Veterans Affairs Department. It began, as most of them did, with, "We regret to inform you," and ended with an apology about medication back orders. His heart medication, the one he had to split in half last week to stretch supply, would arrive in 8 days. He folded the letter and set it beside the others. He had paid part of his rent. Not all. Not because he wouldn't, because he couldn't. The medication cost more this month. He had made a choice. He thought it was the right one. And then, the knock came. Sharp. 3 times. He rose slowly, dusted his trousers, and opened the door. The landlord was already halfway into the hall. "Victor Merritt?" she barked. He nodded once. She raised a finger. "You're out. You were warned. No more delays." She pointed at the floor where a trash bag now rested. "Take what's yours. You've got 1 hour." And then she added the words that would echo into the night. "I don't care what war you fought in." Victor's breath fogged lightly in the air-conditioned hallway. He hadn't realized how sharply the evening had cooled. The sharp voice of the landlord bounced again off the concrete walls. "You heard me?" she snapped, shifting her weight onto one leg and crossing her arms. "You've had your grace period. You're 2 weeks late. I gave you notice. No one's going to cry over a few old medals and overdue rent." Victor stood still, shoulders stiff under the olive drab jacket he wore even in August. The army-issued duffel rested against the inside wall, just beside the threshold. His boots were laced, his cap gently tucked under one arm, but something in his eyes betrayed the fatigue, not just of this moment, but of a long life carried alone. "I don't want trouble," he said simply, voice firm, though quiet. "The check is coming. I made a call." "You should have made it 2 weeks ago," she barked. "I don't run a charity. I don't give special treatment for sob stories and flag pins." She turned and motioned behind her. 2 men appeared at the end of the hallway, both in gray hoodies, wheeling a dolly between them. "This is Mitch and Rob. They'll help you pack up." Victor's hand tightened around the strap of his duffel. His leash slipped slightly in the breeze. The keys still dangled from the knob. The 2 men didn't speak. They nodded at the landlord, avoiding Victor's eyes. One had AirPods in. The other seemed to glance past the old man entirely, already stepping forward toward the door. "Don't touch anything," Victor said, voice gravel thin but certain. The taller mover paused. The landlord laughed. "Or what? You'll salute me? You'll pull out your combat boots?" She reached down and lifted one of the garbage bags beside the wall. It sagged, heavy with folded linens and toiletries. "You should have called your kids or something. Or maybe your retirement home, or hospice." Her voice grew sharper, not louder, the cutting edge of someone used to getting their way. You're dying anyway, aren't you? Victor didn't answer. Instead, he turned slightly toward the stairs. A neighbor, a woman from the second floor, stood frozen near the rail, her toddler balanced on her hip. The child clutched a plastic toy and watched silently. His mother made no move to intervene, but her eyes, heavy, uncertain, held his for a brief second longer than politeness allowed. She turned back inside. Farther down the street, someone stood just past the open door, filming. A young man, jeans, flannel shirt, steady grip on his phone. The landlord hadn't noticed. Victor stepped outside slowly, the cane tapping once on the threshold. His duffel shifted on his shoulder. The sun caught the patches on the sleeve of his jacket. "I fought for this street," he said, not with anger, but like a man speaking aloud to the air. "For these sidewalks, for people I never met." That was never about rent. The landlord rolled her eyes. "Well, this isn't about war. This is about dollars. You're overdue. That's the end of it." She motioned to the movers again. "Clear it. You've got 20 minutes. I'll be changing the lock." Victor looked at her for a long, weighted moment. Then he nodded, stepped off the stoop, and made his way slowly to the curb. He did not look back as the door shut behind him with a hard, final click. Inside, the two movers began collecting things, lifting chairs, drawers, boxing up dishes. The photograph, the one with Tommy circled, was among the first items swept into a padded bin. Across the street, a curtain stirred again. The same figure from earlier stepped away from their window. A phone call was placed, then another. Before sunset, the video had left the neighborhood. By morning, it would reach 1,000 inboxes. And someone, watching in a classroom across town, would recognize Victor's name. The same name from a story his father used to tell, about a man who saved lives in the snow, half a world away. Someone who owed that man more than silence. The movers were fast, impersonal. One, a younger man in sweat-darkened denim, hesitated only once, when his boot brushed the edge of a framed photograph on the floor. He bent to lift it carefully, then glanced toward Victor. Victor sat on the stoop now, not because he was tired, though he was, but because the shaking in his knees had become visible. His army-issued duffel rested beside him, zipped halfway. The sound of a drawer slamming inside echoed like an insult. "Don't touch the flag," Victor said softly. The mover nodded. He didn't ask which flag. He didn't need to. He turned, walked the item out, and whispered something to his partner. Across the street, a boy sat cross-legged on the curb. He watched silently, a school backpack on his lap. A ball cap shaded his eyes. He looked no older than 12. The landlord stood just inside the doorway now, arms crossed, lips pursed. Her voice rose again, sharp and dismissive. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Victor lifted his eyes. Not angry, just tired. "It's already hard." She snorted and turned away. "I've got other tenants to think about." Inside her apartment above, a curtain shifted. Someone was watching. The upstairs neighbor, a quiet man Victor had once helped carry groceries. They had never spoken since. A woman emerged from the stairwell, the same one who had stood on the landing earlier. She walked toward Victor, knelt beside him. "You need a place for the night?" Victor didn't look at her. "I'll manage. I've got a couch," she said, "and an old dog who doesn't bark anymore." Victor smiled almost. "That's two of us then." She opened her mouth to say more, but the landlord stepped forward. "Miss, this doesn't concern you. He's trespassing now." The woman stood. "He lived here 27 years, and I own the building." "You don't own the sidewalk," the woman replied, voice low. "And you don't own dignity." Victor watched her, not surprised, just quietly grateful. His hands rested on his knees, the fingers twitching slightly, a tremor that had begun last winter. Then the second act of the cruelty came. The landlord stepped forward, holding a small plastic bin, labeled in marker, "Merit Bath." She tilted it forward slightly and let the contents drop onto the concrete. A cracked toothbrush, 2 pill bottles, a comb, a bar of soap, now resting in a puddle. There, now he's got everything. Silence. The air itself recoiled. Even the wind stopped moving. Then, a sound. A door opening. Across the street. The boy with the cap stood, backpack still clutched. His mother stepped beside him. They looked at the spilled items, then at the woman, then at Victor. "I'll get a towel," the boy's mother said, turning inside. From upstairs, the neighbor opened the window, spoke for the first time in years. "Is this how we treat soldiers now?" The landlord opened her mouth, but no sound came. Victor's shoulders lifted, fell. He bent to pick up the toothbrush, the comb, the bar of soap. The bottles he ignored. They were empty anyway. Across town, the teacher, Mr. Renner, was staring at his phone. He had paused at the footage someone sent him, a man he recognized, Victor Merritt. He remembered the name, the voice, the stories told at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall when his father was dying. He remembered the quiet voice at the funeral. He was the one who saluted, Renner whispered to himself. The one who folded the flag. His fingers tapped the screen. He forwarded the video to his brother, then to a reporter he knew, then to a Facebook page with thousands of followers. The headline he typed was simple: "Dying veteran evicted for $178. Her words were, 'I don't care what war you served in.'" By nightfall, the video had been shared over 600 times. By midnight, nearly 3,000. And just before dawn, the first message reached the inbox of a small veterans advocacy group, 2 counties over. It read, "You might want to look into this man. His name's Victor Merritt. He carried my father out of a mortar crater in Korea. I was hoping to meet him someday. Guess I better hurry." The wind howled across the mountains of Korea like a voice torn from the sky itself. It bit through layers of cloth and canvas, slicing into skin and spirit alike. Snow mixed with ash as the ground trembled beneath distant artillery fire. The year was 1953. The hill they held had no name, just a number, Outpost Harry. But to the men entrenched in its frozen ridges, it was home, hell, and everything in between. Victor Merritt crouched low in the foxhole, hands numb around his rifle. His breath came in white bursts that vanished just as quickly as they formed. Next to him sat Tommy, his best friend since training, since boyhood in Kansas, since before any of this. Tommy had a way of smiling even in silence, like he was holding onto something warmer than the air around them. The ground shook again, closer this time. Incoming. The whistle of shells grew louder. One landed behind the ridge with a sound like the earth splitting open. Victor ducked instinctively, but Tommy stayed upright, scanning the horizon with his binoculars. "They're regrouping," Tommy muttered, eyes locked on the tree line. "Third time today. They don't quit." Victor looked at him. "Neither do we." A pause. Then Tommy grinned, just a little. "I know," he said. They were ordered forward minutes later, across an open field dusted in white and dread. They moved low, quick, from trench to trench, covering the medics pulling the wounded back from a shelled bunker. The smell of diesel and scorched wool hung in the air like a second fog. Ahead of them, children, South Korean civilians who had sought shelter with the Americans, were being moved to safety. A mother cried out, clutching a toddler, stumbling over rock and ice. That's when it happened. A sudden flash, then the deafening scream of a shell tearing through space and bone. Tommy saw it before anyone else. No time for orders, no time for thought, just movement. He shoved Victor down into the snow, hard, and turned. The shell landed 6 feet behind them. The explosion ripped through the white, painting the cold earth in color. Silence followed, and then came the ringing. Then came the dark. Victor blinked up at a gray sky moments later. His ears hummed. His leg was soaked, not with snow, but with blood. He looked to his side and found nothing but a crater. His rifle was gone. His helmet, gone. His breath came in jagged gasps. He crawled, first forward, then sideways, not even sure what direction was what. The world had no shape anymore, just sound and pain and cold, until his hand hit something soft, cloth, then skin. Tommy, His face was half covered in snow, his uniform torn, blood at the collar, eyes open, staring not in shock, but with an expression Victor would never forget. A half smile, a goodbye without the words. Victor screamed. No one heard. Later, the medics found him, dragging 3 civilians behind him, 2 of them children, one barely clinging to life. His shoulder was burned, his hearing shot. He didn't speak for hours. When they cut off his coat, something clinked onto the table beside him. A dog tag, cracked down the middle, not his. Tommy's. He had grabbed it in the chaos, without realizing, when he pulled Tommy from the snow. The medic reached to take it, but Victor stopped her. "It's not mine," he whispered, voice ragged and low. "But it kept me breathing." The field hospital was quiet the night he woke up. A nurse checked his vitals. The lights buzzed overhead. The surgeon leaned over him gently. "You'll heal up, son. But that one," he tapped the metal tag lying on Victor's chest. "That's the one you'll carry." Victor didn't answer, just closed his hand around it. And for the next 64 years he did. The folding cot at the community center creaked softly as Victor shifted beneath the Army surplus blanket. Morning light filtered through the high windows, thin and colorless. He hadn't slept. Not really. Just rested in fragments. The quiet here was different than at home. No hum of his old refrigerator, no taps from the radiator. Just space and the faraway shuffle of custodians prepping coffee for the first early arrivals. He sat up, slowly. The stiffness had set in deep. His chest ached, and the coughing fit that followed left him gripping the cot frame with both hands. The volunteer nurse, a woman in her 50s, with crow's feet and kind eyes, appeared wordlessly with a cup of warm tea and a packet of crackers. She didn't ask how he was. She knew. Victor nodded a thank you and lifted the cup with trembling fingers. The warmth helped, so did the silence. But by mid-afternoon, the silence was gone. It began as a knock, a single one, low, polite, as if hesitant, then another, louder, then many. The crowd had arrived. From the window, Victor could see the street in front of his old apartment building swelling with movement. People standing in clumps, signs held aloft, folded flags pressed respectfully to chests. The landlord's front door, once so smug in its isolation, now looked more like the gate to a courthouse or a reckoning. At the front stood the young woman from yesterday, the one who had spoken up, only to be dismissed. Today, she was not alone. A dozen high schoolers in varsity jackets flanked her, holding handmade signs. One read, "He served, she shamed." Another, "Respect has no expiration date." Another still, 84 years old, $178. "What's your excuse?" By late afternoon, there were nearly 100. Local police arrived, but not to interfere. They stood in quiet formation at the perimeter, some recognizing Victor from years ago when he spoke at the city's Veterans Day parade. One officer removed his hat and nodded toward the crowd. Another offered bottled water to the youngest protesters. Then came the veterans. First, a single man, dress blues faded but perfectly pressed. Then, 2 more. Then an entire group of retired service members, many with canes, wheelchairs, and medals pinned proudly to their jackets. They didn't shout. They didn't chant. They stood. A stillness overtook the block. Victor stepped forward, escorted gently by the same community center nurse and a younger man wearing the patch of the United States Marine Corps. The moment he came into view, the crowd turned, a visible wave of reverence. Phones were lowered, voices silenced. It was not the hush of pity, it was the silence of respect. Someone, perhaps the Marine escort, handed Victor his old canvas duffel. His name was still stenciled across the top, faded but legible. Inside, folded with perfect precision, was the uniform he had once worn home. On top, the dog tag, not on a chain, but wrapped in cloth, resting like something sacred. He did not put it around his neck. He held it in his palm. A child stepped forward from the crowd, maybe 9 or 10, hair tied back in a patriotic ribbon. She raised her hand in a stiff, sincere salute. Not playful, practiced, eyes steady. Victor looked at her, and for the first time in hours, maybe in days, he smiled. A woman approached next, older, wrapped in a navy coat. Her voice trembled. "You saved my uncle in Korea. His name was Howard Latimer. He used to tell us about you." Victor nodded. "He was a good man." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small note. Faded, handwritten. "He left this for you. Said it belonged to someone who never got thanked properly." Victor took it in both hands, reverently, and behind them, someone placed a folded American flag at the base of the landlord's stoop. Not in aggression, not in protest, but in solemn declaration. A Marine captain stepped forward then, the one who had stood back till now. His voice was calm, sure. "This man gave us freedom to choose. You chose cruelty. We're here to choose honor." The landlord, watching from the second-story window, did not open the door. Her curtain shifted once, then stilled. Victor raised the dog tag high, just once, then lowered it slowly. No words. Instead, he stood straighter than he had in years and gave a sharp, steady salute. And as though on cue, they returned it, one by one. Caps came off, hands rose, heads bowed. The sound of silence spread wider than any cheer. He did not speak. He did not need to. The air outside the building felt different that afternoon, heavier, stiller, as if the town itself were holding its breath. Victor stood between two younger veterans, his coat neatly buttoned, the wind catching its edges like a flag just beginning to stir. His boots, worn but polished, touched the pavement with a slow, unshaken rhythm. The duffel bag had been returned to him, carried by a Marine in dress blues, every zipper intact, every fold exact. The landlord's windows remained closed, curtains drawn. No voice now, no laughter, no commands shouted from a stairwell. What rose instead was silence, deep and wide, stretching across the crowd like reverence woven from breath. One by one they had come, the old, the young. Uniforms both faded and pressed, civilians clutching signs, children with faces painted in red, white, and blue. A nurse who had treated Victor last winter stood near the front, hand over her heart. A pastor, a city clerk, a crossing guard, each of them bearing no weapon but witness. Victor took one step forward, then another. He didn't need to speak. His silence carried everything. At the foot of the stairs, a young man knelt. In his hands, folded with crisp care, was an American flag, tri-cornered and tight. He looked up at Victor and offered it like an oath. Victor accepted it with both hands, the corners aligned perfectly. His shoulders, thin but squared, drew back. He turned slowly, faced the gathered crowd, and saluted. The gesture, slow, formal, exact, was not one of vanity. It was not for show. It was a message to Tommy, to every fallen comrade whose name still echoed in the folds of memory, to every soul watching, wondering if dignity still had a place in the world. The first to respond was a boy, no older than 12, who raised his own small hand, palm flat and firm, eyes locked on Victor. Then a police officer removed his cap and stood at attention. A young woman from the city council followed, her hand trembling slightly as she mirrored the gesture. One by one, the crowd joined, some with salutes, others with bowed heads, some with tears welling but unspilled. It spread like light, a reverent contagion, from the sidewalk to the porches, from the mail truck parked around the corner to the fire chief standing at the back, helmet in hand. And behind a second-floor curtain, the landlord watched. She said nothing. Her mouth parted slightly, but no sound emerged. Her expression, neither defiant nor apologetic, was one of recognition. Late, but real. Victor lowered his arm slowly. He turned, took the flag in both hands, and walked down the front steps of the apartment one final time, past the child who saluted, past the Marine who walked beside him in silent escort, through a sea of presence that had once been absence, now gathered not in anger, but in reverence. He did not smile, but something in his eyes, just beneath the weight, just behind the lines, seemed to lift, if only slightly, a letting go, a carrying forward. The morning after the salute was unlike any the building had seen. There was no shouting, no eviction notice fluttering in the wind. Just a row of candles by the stairwell, their flames flickering against the stone like watchful eyes. Someone had drawn a chalk line near the curb with 3 words beneath it. This is where he stood. Above it, taped to the door, a simple printout of a news headline. Veteran evicted in cold. Town responds with honor. It wasn't just a local article. By noon, national outlets had picked it up. Pictures of Victor's weathered face, the folded flag, the silent crowd. The clip of his salute had gone viral overnight. The comments filled with stories of grandfathers, of medals left in drawers, of wars nobody asked about but hearts still carried. By 2 in the afternoon, the mayor stood on the same steps where Victor had been told to leave. He didn't bring a speechwriter. He didn't need one. What happened here should not have happened, and it won't happen again. Behind him stood 2 council members, the director of the city's housing department and a representative from the local Veterans of Foreign Wars post. The microphone crackled with wind as he continued. This city was built on sacrifice. We are safe because of people like Victor Merritt. Today, the council will introduce the Merritt Amendment. Legislation ensuring veterans facing eviction will receive mediation, city legal support, and emergency housing options before any notice can be served. No one who served this country will face the street alone again. Applause broke out. Not a cheer, something softer, a reverent kind of agreement. Inside her office, the landlord, Melissa Quinn, was quiet for the first time in years. She had spent the night dodging calls. Her name had leaked. Her business reviews had plummeted. Her voicemail was full. But it wasn't the threats or the outrage that haunted her. It was the silence. That moment in the window when Victor had raised his hand in salute, and the world answered back. That quiet strength had cracked something inside her louder than any accusation. She turned off her phone and stared at the folded lease on her desk. Unsigned, unpaid, unimportant now. By week's end, the official notice from the city arrived. Her license to manage rental properties was under investigation. Her right to evict tenants had been suspended, pending review. But for Victor, the wave of response had only just begun. The Veterans of Foreign Wars chapter offered him not just shelter but a permanent home. A room overlooking a flagpole with a garden path winding around a quiet memorial courtyard. Volunteers packed his belongings, each item handled like an artifact. A teenager carried his duffel bag like it held a crown. A middle-aged father carefully folded Victor's blankets into perfect right angles. Nobody spoke of punishment. They moved as if restoring balance. Victor watched from the community center lobby, cane across his knees, dog tag around his neck. "Sir?" a boy asked, gently, maybe 16. "Was it true? You saved people back then?" Victor's answer was slow, humble. "They were just kids, same as me." The boy nodded, then held out a folded paper, a hand-drawn American flag. Under it, written in pencil, "Thank you for staying kind, even when the world wasn't." Victor blinked against the sting in his eyes. He took the paper, folded it carefully, and placed it in the side pocket of his jacket, where Tommy's tag lay. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The sun hung low over the hills, casting long amber streaks across the grass behind the veterans' housing complex. A soft wind moved through the trees, catching the edges of an old flag that fluttered gently above the small memorial garden. The sound of wind chimes rang like a memory, faint, delicate, and full of presence. Victor Merritt walked slowly along the paved path that curved between rose bushes and maple trees. His steps were deliberate, his cane light in hand, the sun warming the back of his cardigan. On his chest, pinned just above his heart, was a single silver dog tag, weathered now, the chain dulled with age, but still sharp with meaning. It glinted briefly in the light with every step he took. He reached the bench beneath the tallest tree, an old sugar maple, its leaves beginning to bronze for the coming autumn. Beneath it, a plaque rested among the roots. The words etched into it were simple, unadorned, but carried weight. In honor of those who served and those who remembered. Victor sat slowly, careful with his knees. The breeze moved through his hair, and he closed his eyes for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his coat, a folded slip of paper, creased at the edges, smoothed over too many times to count. He opened it. The handwriting had faded, but he didn't need to read it to remember what it said. "Tell Mom I did something good." It was the last letter Tommy ever wrote. Mailed 1 week before that day on Outpost Harry, before the shell, before the crater, before everything changed. Victor traced a fingertip across the signature, then folded the paper again, gently, as if it were made of silk. A boy rode past on a bicycle, paused, then turned around. The boy, maybe 10 or 11, stopped by the garden gate. He took off his baseball cap, holding it to his chest. Victor smiled, just barely. He gave a small nod. The boy didn't say anything, just stood there for a moment, then continued on. Victor looked up at the sky, a blue so soft it felt like a memory itself. His breath came slow, steady. "For the ones who never came home," he whispered, "and the ones who waited." He placed the folded note beside the plaque and leaned back into the bench. The leaves above him rustled like a hymn, and for a while, the world was still. Just wind, just sky, just the weight of a life honored. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you are watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.